The G-bodies of NASCAR. Generation 3 refers to the generation of stock cars used in NASCAR from 1981 through 1991. Some of these cars are technically A-bodies but are accepted on the G-body platform. 1978 through 1981 Pontiac Le Mans. 78 through 80 Pontiac's mid-size lineup included the base Le Mans, the Grand Le Mans, and a revived Grand Am, all available as a coupe, sedan, or wagon. Yes, there are G-body wagons. Standard engines being the Buick 3.8-liter V6, Pontiac's 4.3-liter V8, or an optional Pontiac 4.9-liter V8. You got a Chevy 305 if you lived in California for the 1978 model year. Last year for the mid-size Le Mans was 1981 in the U.S. and 1983 in Canada. Cale Yarborough crashed his Monte Carlo at the Daytona 500 in 1983 on his second qualifying lap. With no backup car, his team scrambled and found a Pontiac Le Mans in a Hardee's restaurant parking lot used for promotional purposes painted like his number 28 Monte Carlo. They drove it back to Daytona and restored it in racing conditions. And Cale Yarborough won the 1983 Daytona 500 in a Pontiac Le Mans. Now that's awesome, fellas. Tim Richmond won the 1983 Pocono 500 in a Pontiac Le Mans. 1978 through 1980 Grand Am. 1978 Grand Ams came standard with Pontiac's 4.9-liter V8 with two-barrel carb producing 140 horsepower, or optional four-barrel producing 155 horsepower, and a Chevy 305 if you lived in California. The Grand Am nameplate returned on a downsized model using the Grand Prix G-body platform. It was offered in both 2- and 4-door models featuring a vertical bar grills and other trimmings to differentiate it from the Le Mans. New for 1979 was a 4-speed manual trans available with the 150 horsepower 301 4-barrel, except for California, which only offer automatic transmissions, and a Chevy 305 or a Buick 3.8-liter V6. 1980 was the last year for the second generation Grand Am. Slow sales led to its discontinuation after the 1980 model year. In the first year of the NASCAR Busch Series, the championship was won by Jack Ingram in a 1980 Grand Am. 1978 through 1987 Buick Regal. In 1978, the first turbocharged Regal was introduced as the Regal Sport Coupe. Turbo versions was originally offered with either a 2- or 4-barrel carburetor and 150 or 165 horsepower. The Sport Coupe was replaced by the Regal T-Type in 1983. In February 1982, the Grand National debuted, which was named for the NASCAR Winston Cup Grand National Series. Buick had won the Manufacturers Cup in 1981 and 1982 and wanted to capitalize on its success. What wins on Sunday sells on Monday, and hoping to revive their performance image from the 1960s. The 1982 Grand National came with a natural aspirated 252 cubic inch V6 engine with 125 horsepower and 205 foot-pounds of torque. No Grand National in 1983 and returned in 1984 with a turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 and sequential fuel injection. Richard Petty was able to win his record 7th Daytona 500 in a 1981 Buick Regal. 1979 through 1988 Oldsmobile Cutlass. All other model years except for Turbo Buicks, all G-bodies came with small anemic engines, but the 79 Herzogs used a 350 from larger cars to add performance. 1978 through 1981 are technically A-bodies, but are accepted on the G-body platform. The 79 Herzogs came with the famous dual-gate shifter and turbo 350 transmission. The L34 Oldsmobile 350 engine was rated at 170 horsepower and featured a 700 CFM Rochester quadrijet carb. The Herzogs edition reappeared for 2 years in 1983 and 1984. From 1985 through 1987, the 442 replaced the Herzogs as the high-performance model until 1984. The deluxe Cutlass Supreme model was known as the Cutlass Calais. When the Calais nameplate moved to its own platform in 1985, the Cutlass Supreme was renamed to Cutlass Salon. As the new front-wheel drive Cutlass Supreme models was being launched in 1988, the rear-wheel drive G-body platform coupe remained in production for one more year as the Cutlass Supreme Classic. Buddy Baker's number 88 car was a 1985 Oldsmobile Cutlass. 1978 through 1987 Pontiac Grand Prix. For the 78 model year, a Buick 3.8-liter V6 was standard equipment, and two versions of the Pontiac 4.9-liter were optional. Chevy 305 engines were offered if you lived in California. A floor-mounted 3-speed manual transmission was standard with the V6 on the base model, and a 3-speed turbo hydromatic was optional. In 1981, a minor reskinning of the sheet metal was done to improve aerodynamics. Also in 81 was the last year that Pontiac's motor division offered its own V8 engine due to an emerging GM corporate engine policy. In 1986, a new 2+2 model was offered. All 2+2 models came equipped with a corporate 305 4-barrel, 204R 4-speed automatic trans, and a 308 rear axle ratio. The 1987 Grand Prix basically was a rerun of the 1986 model year, aside from the discontinuation of the 2+2. This would be the last year for the Gbody Grand Prix. Richard Petty's number 43 car in 1984 was an 1983 Pontiac Grand Prix. J.D. McDuffie's number 70 car was a 1984 Pontiac Grand Prix. 1978 through 1988 Monte Carlo. Standard engine being the 231 V6 Buick engine or an optional Chevy 305. The 3-speed manual transmission reappeared for the first time in several years as standard equipment on the base model with V6 engine, and the automatic was optional. The optional V8 in all Landau models came standard with the automatic. A 4-speed manual transmission with floor shifters was optional with the Chevy 305. 1979 was the last year Chevy would offer the manual transmissions on the Monte Carlo. A 1979 Monte Carlo was driven by Denzel Washington in the movie Training Day. 1980, the metric 200 3-speed automatic transmission became standard on all models. A new option for 1980 was Buick's turbocharged version of its 231 V6 rated at 170 horsepower. Only one team tried to make a go at it in NASCAR Cup racing, while the Big Monte Carlos was the most dominant body style in the late 1970s. 1981 body would take 2 checkered flag wins in 1981 and 1982 seasons. When it was run, the Chevy Monte Carlo was used in NASCAR until 1989, with the 1986 Aero Coupe maybe being the most popular. The legend himself and one of the best drivers that ever drove NASCAR, Dale Earnhardt Sr., drove the number 3 Goodwrench 1988 Monte Carlo Aero Coupe.